Hello, and welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to do something a little bit different and talk about the books that I would like to reread. I love rereading books. I find it to be a really positive experience to dive back into books that I previously had loved. But I thought it would be interesting to talk through a couple of books that are on my radar to reread because I read them quite a while ago, and I feel like it's hard to talk about them if I don't remember like key parts of them. I only remember really loving them, but I don't necessarily remember all of the details as to why I loved them. So this video is just to share those books with you and talk about the things that I'm excited to reread and to give me a chance to refresh on these books. So let's get into it. Okay, the first book I want to talk about is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. So this was the first book by Machado that I read. I read this in summer of 2020. Funny story about this, actually, I had this on my radar, and it was, COVID times and businesses were not open. So what I did is I put in a curbside like pickup order, contactless order with a bookstore that I had never been to before, and it was about 35 minutes away, so I got to drive somewhere for 35 minutes, which was so exciting after being in quarantine for so long. And I picked up my order outside of the building. It was just in a bag. It was this and a few other books because I had no reading materials. I had gone through all of my reading materials by summer of 2020. And that bookstore became one of my all-time favorites. So that's sort of the origin story of that. But anyway, I got this book and I just loved the experience of reading it. I fell in love with Machado's writing style, and from there I purchased her memoir when it came out, In the Dream House, and that became my favorite of her two books. However, I still really loved this book, and I feel like the only story that I genuinely remember in this is The Husband Stitch, which retells that story of the girl who had a green ribbon around her neck, and when someone takes the ribbon off, her head falls off. So it's a retelling of that. So that is the only story that I genuinely remember, and I feel like as a Machado stan, I need to refresh my memory on her stories because I feel like I remember the general vibe of this collection and how she incorporates these different types of storytelling, whether it is fantasy, sci-fi, horror, all these different elements come together to create this collection, but I don't remember details. So that is one that I definitely want to reread at some point, though I'm not going to promise when. Okay, the next one is Bluets by Maggie Nelson. This is a very short essay. It's not really an essay collection because it is about one topic and it's sort of one essay that touches on all these different things, but it's told in a series of vignettes and they're numbered, sort of like a list, but it's all about the color blue and Maggie Nelson's experiences with the color blue and how the color relates to different aspects of her life and her experience. I annotated all over this book, and I think it would be fun to go back through and sort of read my annotations and see what I had to say at the time and how that differs from my experience now. But this was actually a book that I read for college. I was taking a creative nonfiction class, and we read this and did sort of a list format work with this in mind. And this was my favorite work that I took away from that class. I had never heard of Maggie Nelson before, and I just fell in love with her writing style and her contemplations on the color and all these different aspects of her life. I just thought it was great. And from here, I tried to read another Maggie Nelson book, and I don't think I liked it as much. But I would really like to come back to this and revisit my annotations and my experience with this book because it was so inspiring in terms of just contemplating and the way that she thinks about things, but also in terms of writing and seeing how she crafts this essay. And I think it's so interesting and it makes me want to write again. So I really want to get inspired and reread this book. But yeah, that is the second book that I would like to revisit at some point. Next up, I have a translated book. This is the only translated book on this list as of right now, but it is Magma by Thora Hjörleifsdóttir. This was one of my top 2 picks. I believe it was in 2022, I think. No, 2021. I'm looking, I used to stamp my books with the date that I read them, and I haven't done that in a while, so it might be nice to keep track of that. Obviously, I have Goodreads as a way to keep track of those things, but I don't stamp my books anymore. and I kind of miss that. I should start doing that again. So this is also a book that I annotated heavily and took notes in. It is a book about a woman in Iceland who is a university student, and she is smitten with this older man, and it's sort of about their toxic relationship and the abuse that she suffers at the hands of this man. He's manipulative, and he causes a lot of emotional and mental harm to her throughout the book, and so it is very difficult to read in that way, but I found it to be so profound and powerful, like literally to the point where I wrote like a whole page worth of notes on one of the blank pages in here, because truly this book meant so much to me at the time that I read it, and I found the writing to be absolutely incredible. But I don't really remember a lot of the details of what happens in the story. I just remember the overall vibe and remember connecting with it so deeply. But I feel like if this is consistently going to be a favorite book of mine, I feel like I need to brush up on what happens in it. So this sort of brings up a point as to why I want to reread books in general, particularly favorite books. I think all of the books on this list are all like 4 or 5 star reads. And obviously, like if you didn't love a book, you might not want to reread it. But if I'm going to claim a book as a favorite, I feel the need to brush up on it every so often so that I can remember what I loved about it, and so that I can talk about it, whether it is in person with people when they ask me about my favorite books, whether it is for Bookstagram or BookTube. If I'm going to talk about favorite books, I feel like I need to revisit them and remember why I loved them. So that's sort of my reasoning as to why I want to reread all of these books. But yeah, that is Magma, and I'm hoping to reread this one soon. Okay, next up we have a fun one that I actually have reread already, but not in quite a while. It looks like the first read of this was in 2019, and the second read was in 2021. I really wish that I did this, like I said, with all of my books now, because this is super helpful. And one of my friends from book club actually just read this for the first time, and it just made me want to reread this so badly. So this is about a woman named Lois who works at a tech startup company, and she is not taking care of her health very well. She's working crazy hours. She's basically eating company provided sludge for all of her meals. And then a sandwich and soup place pops up, and she starts going there for food and just falls in love with sourdough and all the food that they make. And when those brothers who own the company have to move away, they give her the sourdough starter, and so that she can bake her own bread. And it starts this whole whirlwind adventure that she has just from this starter and from the sourdough. So it's very whimsical. It's a magical realism book. And I do remember a bit more about this, I think, than some of the other books because I have reread it before, but it's just such a fun book, and the audiobook is so great, and I just desperately want to fall back into the story again and the whimsy of it. When I was in college, I actually wrote a poem about sourdough, and it was sort of based on the whimsy of this book and my experience baking sourdough, essentially inspired by this book because I started making sourdough after I read this for the first time. I just was so inspired by it. Side note, it is a bit more difficult to make gluten-free sourdough starter and sourdough bread for sure. So that was an adventure, but at least it helped me, you know, find something to do during 2020 and quarantine times. I made so much bread, as I feel like all of us did, but I digress. This is just such a fun book, and with a friend reading it recently, it just made me want to read it again. So that is Sourdough. Next up is another book that I have reread before, and it is Hysteria by Jessica Gross. I've talked about this many times on my channel. I read it once in 2020 and again in 2022. So it has been about 3 years since I reread this book, and I feel like it might be about time. So it is about a woman who lives in Brooklyn, and she goes into a bar and she thinks she sees Sigmund Freud, and from there she's sort of unpacking her family trauma and history with that, and explores her desires and the ways in which her trauma manifests. This book is such a fever dream. It's such a trip, and I loved it the first time I read it. Obviously, I reread it. It became an all-time favorite of mine. But again, I feel like I recommend this to people all the time, yet I don't remember a lot of key plot points. And I just feel like it might be time for a refresh after, you know, not having read it for like 3 years. So hoping to get to this one soon. It is a very short one, so probably would be pretty easy to fly through again, especially because I already know that I love it. So yeah, that is Hysteria, and I desperately want to reread this, so hopefully I'll be able to soon. Okay, next up is Boy Parts by Eliza Clark. So I've only read this one time in 2021. I read it for October for Halloween. And during the time that I was in a massive reading slump and was not keeping up with the book community, 2 other books came out by this author. She released 2 more books, and I just did not know about them whatsoever. So now I do, and I do want to read both of those. However, I do feel like I want to come back to this, maybe not first, but at some point as I'm reading her other books, because one, I've heard some polarizing things about this recently, and people seem to either really love it or really hate it. And 2, this was one of the foundational Weird Women feminine rage books that I read, along with a couple other ones. This was one of the first ones that I ever read. So it started this trajectory for me of this weird fiction, women behaving badly, all of those things. And there are so many books that I've read after this that have been really great. And I sort of do owe this and books like Hysteria for my obsession with this genre. However, I really wonder whether I would feel differently coming back to it, if I would still think it was so amazing, or if I would feel like it didn't necessarily wow me anymore after having read all of these other weird books. I'm not sure. That's kind of why I want to reread it, but I'm always sort of waiting for a good opportunity, because I do feel like it's fun to read this in October, and I feel like I have not gotten to it. Every year since then, I feel like I've put this on my TBR to read in October, and it has been 4 years and I haven't read it yet. So hopefully soon. So next up, I have Mostly Dead Things by Kristen Arnett. So I was obsessed with this book the first time I read it. I've only read it once, and I read it in summer of 2021 in August. And to me, this felt like such a perfect summer read. I think it takes place in summer and it's in Florida. But anyway, this book follows a woman named Jessa Lynn Morton, and it's about her family and her reeling from this experience of her father committing suicide and leaving the taxidermy business to her. So she's sort of just ruminating on her experiences with her father, about keeping this business running, about the after effects and how each family member is handling this trauma, and also about her romantic relationships. She is queer, and we see her interacting with different women that she's dating or interested in, and how her trauma kind of plays into those relationships. She is, I would say, not an unlikable character, but she is a bit more of like a weird woman character, if you will. So that was really enjoyable about this as well. It's sort of like a dark yet funny family story through the eyes of the eldest daughter. And yeah, I loved it when I read it, but I'm just losing some details since it's been like 4 years since I read it. However, what makes this an interesting case is that I've tried to read her other books, and so far I haven't found another one that I liked as much as this one. With Teeth was okay. I don't remember if I gave it 3 stars or somewhere around there, 3 or 4, but I think I was a little bit overly nice. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as a 4-star rating if I did give it 4 stars. Thinking back, I just don't remember loving it. But I also tried to read her short story collection, and I was not getting into that whatsoever. So I did not enjoy that. However, she just released another book this year, and it's like about a clown, I think. I haven't read it yet, but it is sort of on my upcoming TBR. At some point I will get to it. I have it on hold on Libby. So at some point it'll come in and I will get to it. I just don't know if I'm gonna like anything as much as this one. This was just such a favorite of mine. But I keep giving her books a try because I'm just holding out for one that is as good as Mostly Dead Things. Okay, so the last 3 books on this list are books that I actually do intend on rereading this year. So first up out of these 3, we have Days of Distraction by Alexandra Chang. So this was on my 25 books to read in 2025 list, and this was the only reread on that list. So I do intend to get get to it. I also think I'm going to be reading this with my best friend at some point, so hopefully we'll get to read it together. It is about a young woman who moves across the country with her boyfriend to follow his job, and it's about her experience in a unequal feeling relationship, her experience as an Asian American and dealing with identity, as well as a book about her experience in her corporate job and finding a job amidst all of these other things happening in her life and these big life transitions, and sort of battling against the void. It's a more quiet take on these subjects, and I just found it extremely poignant and relatable. I believe I read this in 2022, though I don't have it stamped in here. However, it was around the time that I was about to move across the country, and while my life experiences differed greatly from hers and I didn't have this kind of unequal relationship feeling, it was a huge life transition, and a lot of the things that she talks about and the feelings she experienced, I related to heavily at the time. So it was a very important book for me to read at that stage in my life. I also just loved the writing, and I loved the character and all of the different explorations of identity. So I really, really, really want to reread this, and I really think that my best friend would enjoy it too. So we're gonna hopefully read it together. But this is on my list to read this year, so I better get to it. And the last two books on this list are books that I'm actually going to be reading for book club. So I go to a monthly book club in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and two of the books for this year are going to be rereads for me. So the first one is Eileen by Ottessa Moshfegh. I have a weird relationship with Ottessa Moshfegh. I feel like I have enjoyed several of her books, but some of her other books I have absolutely hated. So it's kind of up and down, but she is sort of a quintessential weird women, unlikable main character writer. Her and Mona Awad sort of are two of the like main people that write these kind of books and sort of launched this into the like popular literary canon nowadays. So I do want to revisit Eileen because obviously I'm going to be doing that for book club, but this was my favorite of her books, so I'm excited that this is the one that we're going to be rereading. It follows a woman named Eileen, and she is taking care of her alcoholic father, and she's also working at a prison, and she meets this older woman who also works at the prison, and they sort of team up and commit a crime, and she is incredibly unlikable, and there are many moments where you're kind of like grossed out by her. She is a quintessential unlikable, unreliable narrator, and I love her. I thought this book was awesome. I loved it so much, but I don't remember a lot of the details. I feel like I need to revisit the back of this book as I'm describing it to you because, to be honest, I don't remember a lot about it. I just remember it being such an important book in my journey towards reading all of these unlikable, unreliable main character books. So we're going to be reading this later on this year, and we're going to be watching the movie all together. We're going to go to some kind of screening of it, which will be super, super fun to watch with other people, especially having reread this. I saw the movie came out and then I just didn't watch it because I knew that I would want to reread this before I did that, and I just wasn't in the mood to reread it at the time that it came out. So now I have an actual reason to reread it and enjoy the movie, so that's going to be super fun. Okay, and the final book that I want to talk about is Pew by Catherine Lacey. So this is going to be the December book club read, and I am so excited about this. I thought that this book was incredibly thought-provoking. So it is about a person who is genderless and racially ambiguous and refuses to speak, and they're found in this church in this unnamed town, and it's about all of the people in the town and how they treat this person and how people are unnerved by this person. They end up calling the person Pew, and it sort of feels like Flannery O'Connor adjacent in the sense that it is sort of foreboding and gothic and addresses themes of religion and the ways in which people perceive other people through a religious lens. It was just so thought-provoking, and I feel like I sort of got it when I read it for the first time, but I do feel like revisiting it after so much of my own deconstruction journey and my own experience of living, you know, in the South Midwest area and experiencing the judgmentalness of church people, in my experience, not saying everyone is like that, but I feel like it will be really interesting to come back to this and to examine that, and also how it relates to gender and gender expression. I just think that there's so much here, and I really want to go back through and annotate it. I did not annotate it at the time. I think I bought this and then listened to the audiobook, but this time I do want to go back and actually physically read it and take notes and annotate and be able to, I don't know, just spend some more time with it and learn a little bit more as I'm going through it. So very, very excited to reread this one. I was just over the moon when the leader of the group chose this as the December read. So super, super excited about this one. So yeah, those are all the books that I wanted to mention today, all the books that I really want to reread at some point and come back to. There are a couple of books that I feel like I do reread much more frequently, and while I will definitely want to come back to those again, I have reread some of them earlier this year or in 2024, so I feel like it's not quite time. But a lot of these books I haven't read in 3-4 years, so I do feel like these are the ones that need to come back into the rotation so that I can remember them. But those are all the books that I wanted to share with you today. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.